I'd like to introduce our speaker today, nurse practitioner Amy Siple. And Amy, welcome to Pachyderm.
Thank you. Delighted to be with you today as we talk a little bit about standing for truth in a culture of lies. So about 5 years ago, I felt like we were living in the twilight zone. Truth and logic were incongruent with the prevailing narrative, and I'm sure you would agree. There were lies being foisted on us from every angle. So my husband and I were driving to Topeka one day, and we asked the Lord, God, what battlefront do you want us on? Because the battle is always for truth, is it not? From the beginning of time, it has been a battle for truth. So we get to the Capitol, and we're praying with a bunch of patriots. Probably some of you were there. And a random person walked up to us in the crowd and said, I'm a PA. And if I don't take that COVID shot, I'm going to lose my job. I looked at my husband. I said, that was weird. And then about 5 minutes later, a gentleman came up. He said, I'm a physical therapist. If I don't take that COVID shot, I'm going to lose my job. After the fourth or fifth person, we said, okay, Lord, we hear you. So we tracked these people back down and we said, we are going to open up our home 1 week from today at this time. And you are welcome to come, and we're just going to provide a safe place for you to talk about your concerns and what you are seeing out there in your work environment. Because when lies are foisted on society, the truth is squelched. And you're not allowed to speak about it. We were not allowed to talk about it at work. Now, we said this is not on social media. It's only, you guys are invited, and anyone you know personally who is like-minded. Would you believe 18 people showed up in our living room the next week, and I didn't know most of them. Representative Sandy Pickert was one of them. She wasn't a representative at the time. She was working as a nurse. And this group grew. We stayed off of social media, and we said, once again, the only people that are allowed to come, and Denise Murkowski came to those meetings too, the only people that are allowed to come are healthcare professionals that have been vetted by somebody in this group and invited by them personally. We grew to over 100 people, and we had every discipline represented. We had surgeons and anesthesiologists and nurses and physical therapists and occupational and speech pathology and radiology technology. Every discipline was represented. And the stories we heard were so egregious. Lies, corruption, and murder was becoming commonplace in our healthcare system. It was the battlefront God had us on at that point. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey of the different battlefronts God has asked me to stand on personally, and I know you have your own stories as well. We are constantly called to stand for truth in a culture of lies. Now, the medical community has been used to promote propaganda since the beginning of time. There's lots of evidence to support that. So tyrannical governments will use healthcare professionals because we are trusted by the public. So the Soviets actually used the promotion of health and sanitation in the 1920s to gain access to the children in order to propagandize them. The Nazis used medical people to claim that Jewish people were infectious and that they had to be isolated as a result, and that they weren't even human, so that they could justify conducting their horrific exposure to experiments and torture. Now, more recently, following 9/11, boy, were we willing to give up freedom. When people are scared, that's when you give up freedom. When people are scared, that's when you swallow lies. So the Patriot Act was passed, but something else very important was passed. It was pushed through by Republicans. The Model State Emergency Health Powers Act, which provided a state's governor sole discretion to declare a public health emergency, and once declared, public health professionals gain police power. And this is what happened, and this is what we just witnessed. a few years ago. Now, our forefathers knew this was a risk. They knew that if we were scared, we would give up freedom. In fact, Ben Franklin said those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety. The pressure was intense. I remember during I call it the plandemic, my husband was a captain on the Wichita Fire Department, and I was a geriatric nurse practitioner taking care of Medicare and Medicaid clients. We saw firsthand the harm of the lockdowns. We saw firsthand the harm of the COVID shots. And I taught pharmacology for 15 years. I understand the phases of drug development. And when it was being pushed on pregnant women, man, my alarm bells were firing. And I knew a lot of pregnant women who had miscarriages following those shots. And so now God's moving us into a different battlefront. And my husband said, we are not going to take this. So as a firefighter, captain on the fire, he was being pushed, and I thought that they would require it. They ended up not. Well, I'm taking care of Medicare and Medicaid clients, and President Biden said that anyone providing care to them had to take it. In one of the buildings that I would go into, the administrator forced me to put on a yellow gown when I would enter. And then he would come out and say in a loud voice to the patients and anybody else there, if anyone here dies of COVID, look at the people in the yellow gowns. You have them to blame. This is despite the fact that the shot did not block acquisition or transmission. I'm telling you, the pressure was intense. And my husband said, the Lord is giving us an opportunity to exercise our spiritual muscle of resistance. Well, that made me think, exercise our spiritual muscle of resistance. What does it take to build muscle? Resistance. And I can tell you probably lift a lot of weight. So you have to overcome gravity. You have to overcome comfort and complacency in order to build muscle. So in my home at 5 a.m., one of us is building muscle. I completely embrace the gravitational pull that keeps my head in contact with my pillow. My husband, on the other hand, at 5 a.m. is in our garage, putting himself in very uncomfortable situations. It's painful, and he can't do that just once. He has to do it regularly. He has to continue persevering in order to build muscle, and the same is true for us. We have to build our spiritual muscles of resistance. Romans 5, 3-4 says, not only so, but we give glory in our sufferings. I mean, look at my husband's face. That's suffering. Because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. How many people in here want hope? We all want hope. How do we get hope? Glory in our sufferings. I mean, what God asks us to do is often seems illogical, isn't it? I mean, it seems illogical. So many times when we are standing and we are exercising our spiritual muscle, it's going to look illogical. It's going to seem illogical. I'm sure to Abraham's family, they're like, you're going to do what? And Noah and crossing the Red Sea. He doesn't ask us to do things that the world says make sense. But if we want hope, we glory in our sufferings and we persevere. So there were some studies done after the Nazi atrocities were revealed. Scientists wanted to understand how in the world would the German people go along with such horrific atrocities. So one of the studies that they conducted was called the Solomon Asch experiment, in which they brought in a group of actors, so young actors, and they said, we are going to ask you which two lines are the same, and we want you to say line 1 and 2 are the same length. And then they brought in a different subject, and it was a college student, a subject, to sit in that room. So the experimenters would go around the room to all the actors and say, which two lines are the same? And they'd say line 1 and 2. And when they got around to the college student who wasn't an actor, 75% of the time, he would just go along with the group. He would deny logic. He would deny his own reason. He would deny his own eyes. He would deny the truth. The left knows this. The left knows this. We need to understand the tactics that they use on us all the time. And what they found in these studies is that people will self-censor their views if they think they're in the minority. So all you have to do is to give the perception that they're in the minority. And does our media not do a good job of that? They want us to think that we are in the minority when we are actually the silent majority. We have to get loud. What's really interesting, what these studies shows, is the false enforcement. Once somebody buys into the lie, they will help enforce it on others as well. And I could just go, if I had more time, I'd tell you study after study in which they demonstrated that. Once they could get people to buy into the lie, something they knew was a lie, they would help enforce it on others. Sweden Duke said, the further society deviates from the truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. So now God said, I've got a different battlefront for you. And he doesn't keep us comfortable, does he? So Proverbs 31, 8 through 9 says, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. The rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. So I was taking care of clients in long-term care facilities who had been forced into solitary confinement for up to 2 years. It was the most wicked, evil thing. However bad you think that environment was, I promise it was worse. Because the staffing shortages were so egregious, and they got rid of all the extra people, the support staff, the physical therapists, occupational therapists in a lot of those buildings. Families couldn't come in. People were dying in their filth. They were dying alone. They were dying hungry. I'm telling you, it was so bad. So God said, I need you to talk. And I knew that was a risk. In fact, the Board of Nursing said, I had been told that anybody who spoke against the mandates, they wanted to come after. And there was a risk in doing it. But when God asks you to do something, he gives you a platform, does he not? So I do a lot of public speaking. I've done some TEDx speaking. And so I'm contacted by different groups. And so I was contacted by OSHA. And they said, we'd like you to do a contracted speaking with us. And I said, what do you want me to talk on? And they said, COVID. I go, really? I've got a lot to say about COVID. Don't know if you're going to like it, but I have a lot to say about it. And Project Echo. And so he started giving me platforms in order to speak. And I was going around the country and telling the truth of what was happening. I spoke in the House. I spoke in the Senate. And my husband said, your public speaking business is about to crash. He said, those are one and done because, a lot of people don't like to hear the truth, especially if you bought into the lie. But he gives you opportunities for that. And this is just some of the things that I was speaking. I was using evidence. So what do we know? That social isolation is one of the biggest risk factors for mortality for older adults. It is a bigger risk for mortality than whether you smoke, have obesity, and are sedentary. So you would be better off smoking and hanging out at the bar than you would sitting alone in your house as far as your mortality risk. I mean, this is huge. We knew all of this going into the mandates. We knew all of it. All the studies were out there. This has been well researched. You increase the risk of dementia by 50%. You increase your risk of a stroke by 32% by being socially isolated. And if you have heart failure, you quadruple your risk of death. We knew all of this prior to the mandates. We created a bed-to-chair existence, and in some of my nursing homes, they didn't even have a chair. All they had was a bed. So we made people basically bedbound, and most of them never walked again. Well, most of them died. But the hazards of immobility are very well documented. Do I have any nurses in the room? Okay, so you know the hazards of immobility. I mean, it's one of the biggest risk factors there are. And so we knew this going into that. And so I was fighting about, we've got to get people up. We have to get them moving. And falls is one of the most serious risk factors for my older adults, particularly in long-term care. If my clients in long-term care fall and fracture a hip, there is a 50% chance they'll be dead in 6 months. Now, keep in mind, when my clients got COVID, I mean, COVID was real. I took care of a lot of it. I had a less than 10% mortality rate. Well, look at these mortality rates. I mean, it doesn't even compare. What are we doing? Less than 10%. Of course, I use vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc, ivermectin, NAC. I use that treatment regimen, and most of my patients recovered. And these are the frailest of the frail. I'm taking care of people that are 100 years old. But most of them recovered. 90% of them recovered. The leading cause of death in long-term care is aspiration pneumonia. So there are a lot of different conditions as folks get older that put them at risk for aspiration. But what did we do? We said that these people weren't even allowed swallow studies. And they ate every meal alone in their room, so nobody's watching them choke. And so, of course, they died. They died of pneumonia, aspiration pneumonia, and every single pneumonia death was called a COVID death during that time. They classified them all as COVID deaths. And so I was just watching people drop like flies. It was so horrible. I tell you, we had one lady, she wasn't allowed to see a dentist. She had to remove an infected dental implant with a butter knife. I mean, this is what was happening. And I could just tell you story after story that would just make you sick. This is what was happening in our facilities in Kansas. And so I spoke out about it. This was the battlefront then. Johns Hopkins came out with a study. They looked at a meta-analysis to the end of 2022, and they said lockdowns maybe reduce death by 0.2%. 0.2%. But how many of you think that the next time we have some virus released, we're going to go back, they're going to try to push us back into lockdown? We have the data. God asked us to use our minds and not just blindly follow the experts. So here is the big looming question, is it not? Why did healthcare providers who you know and love and trust, why did they deny the logic? Why did they deny the evidence that I just showed you? I am not that smart, but it was obvious. So how in the world does the world convince healthcare professionals to deny what they know is true? And let's talk about that. What pressure points do they use to encourage compliance in the medical community? And how can we exercise our spiritual muscle of resistance so that we can stand for truth? Romans 12:2 says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, so you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, what is acceptable, what is perfect." God is the author of order and logic. He wants us to use our brains. So let me talk to you a little bit about one of the strategies that encourages compliance among healthcare professionals. Now, probably, I don't know, at least 20 years ago, maybe more, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, there was a big shift and change in the way medicine was practiced. So it used to be that physicians would look at the studies, they would talk to each other, their colleagues, they would use their experience in order to determine how to care for patients. And then protocols were developed. So protocols are sort of like a recipe, and they tell you what to do. And there's protocols for just about every disease you can imagine. Diabetic ketoacidosis, tachycardia. You just follow the directions. And it just tells you this happens and do this, this happens, do this, and you just follow directions. And so that is how healthcare is primarily managed these days, is following the protocols. Now, just imagine this. If you have been practicing by the recipe book and now somebody says these recipes are corrupt, what does that do to your foundation? I mean, you just pulled the rug right out from underneath that person. So a physician I really respect and I really trust, I really like, he had said to me, "Amy, I'm hearing what you're saying, but you have no idea how smart those people at the NIH and the CDC are." And I said, "I do not doubt their intellect at all. Is it possible that they're corrupt?" And he stopped and he said, I can't even let my brain go there with you. If that was the case, all would be lost. I won't even consider that. But I just need you to, that's where you're at though. If I acknowledge that the protocol, that recipe is wrong for one condition, I have to at least entertain the fact that maybe some of the other protocols are corrupt too. And that is a really shaky ground for anyone to be on. Ephesians 4:17 says, now this I say and testify in the Lord that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. And what I discovered, and I'm sure you have too, is there's a revolving door between Big Pharma and the people that run our 3-letter health agencies until we got RFK Jr. in there. I mean, this has been going on for decades. Is it possible that Big Pharma is influencing the recipe book? 1 Corinthians said, where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the wise? And so I was saying, the emperor has no clothes. The emperor has no clothes. And people are dying because of it. And it was so hard. And I'm sure you were feeling the same way, trying to wake people up to the truth. Joseph Goebbels, who was a Nazi propaganda minister, said, if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. And Mark Twain said, a lie will travel halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get its pants on. So let's talk about the measures to push conformity, particularly on the healthcare professionals. Social pressure. We talked about the experiments that were done. We want to belong. We want to be appreciated. I was asked to speak for the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. Well, that was an honor. I was so excited to do it. And then they found out I hadn't taken the shot and they canceled me. And then I received the scorn of my colleagues. That's really hard. It's hard to be disavowed by, just the community, but especially your professional colleagues who are now accusing you of being stupid and gullible and on all these names that they call you. That is very difficult when you have worked really hard to get a certain degree and join this profession, and now the profession is isolating you. That's really hard to stand when you're in that situation. The financial pressures. There are financial incentives, for example, to make sure that everyone in your practice is vaccinated. There's financial incentives to follow the protocols. The hospitals got a lot of money for following the protocols. That's financial pressure. Internal pressure. It is far easier to fool a man than to convince him he's been fooled. Far easier to fool a man than to convince him he's been fooled. Pride is a powerful thing, and people do not want to acknowledge or entertain the fact that they could have been wrong. Student loans. The loans people are leaving college with, and how are you going to pay those back? If you don't go along to get along and you lose your license because of it, how in the world are you going to pay back $500,000 in student loans, for example? How would you do that?
You vote Democrat, let them.
Short of losing your soul, how would you do that? Job insecurity. So this is so it used to be physicians own their practice. 50 years ago, they owned their own practices. Then they were bought out by bigger groups, and they were bought out by the hospitals. And then if you don't do what they tell you to do, you lose your job. You're out. And it gets worse because you've signed a non-compete, which means you cannot work within like a 50-mile radius or whatever. They've got you. So the practice that I had worked for about 20 years, he sold out to a large conglomerate, probably, I don't know, I guess it was in 2023. And so they wanted me to stay on with them, and I interviewed with them. And I asked them, I said, okay, I just need to know, are you going to dictate to me how to prescribe And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, like when my patients get COVID, I use ivermectin. They said, you wouldn't be able to do that. And I said, I'm not your girl. So, but you have to choose then. They dictate how you take care of patients, for example. So imagine that kind of pressure. How are you going to take care of your family? How are you going to earn a living if you don't go along to get along? You're going to lose your job. Lawsuits. So especially like with the COVID protocol, if you followed the protocol, you were immune from lawsuits. But if you don't, you're wide open. And those protocols, those recipes I showed you, those are called the standard of care. So if you ever are sued, that's what they're going to look at. Did you follow the recipe? And if you didn't, man, do you open yourself up to lawsuits. That's a big deal. But the biggest risk is board discipline. Look at Peter McCullough. I mean, one of the most respected cardiologists out there. So many accolades. How many times has he been published? But yet they went after his license. And if they take away his license, he can't practice. He's done. You can't practice without a license. So board discipline is a very powerful motivator to ensure conformity. And you are 90% more likely to face board discipline than you are a lawsuit. Which leads me to the next battlefront God put me on. So the right to practice any profession is actually subject to the police powers of the state. That is huge. It doesn't matter how much schooling you went to. It doesn't matter if you've never been disciplined before or been sued or how many times you've published or all the wonderful things you've done. Your license can be taken and it's gone. So I'll tell you a little bit about my story and then the journey with the next battle that God put me on. So it was the last spring of 24, my husband was diagnosed with metastatic cancer, and I was terrified. I mean, firemen have terrible rates of cancer, and it's often with poor outcomes because of all the stuff that they're exposed to, especially during the cleanup of those fires. And at the same time, that practice that I had worked for sold out to a big conglomerate, so I wasn't working in the field. I didn't join them, so I decided not to take another job, but just provide care to my husband. Well, around October, he had had surgery and he'd stabilized, and I was ready to get back to work and start taking care of patients again. So before I applied, I went on the Board of Nursing's website just to check my license. I'd been a nurse for 32 years in the state of Kansas. I'd never renewed my license late. I've never been sued. I've never had any complaints filed against me. But I went on the Board of Nursing's website because it was just such a time where I couldn't remember if I'd renewed or not. I didn't receive any reminders from the board, but just taking care of my husband. And it's like, I know my license renewal has to be coming up soon. And we renew every 2 years. So it's not like it's a every year thing. So I get on the website and I see, oh, my license expired. Actually, the first day of expiration was June the 1st of 2024. So I contacted the Board of Nursing and said, hey, all of my education was current prior to the expiration, and my malpractice has never lapsed. I'm sending that to you to show evidence of it, but I'm late paying you. So the only thing I'm guilty of is paying them on time. Said I didn't receive a renewal reminder. I know it's my responsibility to keep my license current, but I wasn't even practicing as a nurse during the time, but here's all my information. I expected a late fee. Oh no, that's not what they had planned. They said, you need to be disciplined. And part of that discipline includes a public shaming process in which we are going to put you on 3 databases in perpetuity listing you with unprofessional conduct. And we're going to put you in our newsletter. So now I am in that battle. I started fighting it. I got an attorney, and my attorney said, this is the most vindictive, maniacal board in Topeka. If you choose to fight them, I have to let you know that it's going to get ugly. And he said, you can be the sacrificial lamb and you might be able to affect change for the next generation of nurses because I know you're going to fight it. But just know that you're going to pay a heavy toll to do this. And so after then, I pursued this. I spoke to Representative Sandy Pickert and I went to the media. And then fortunately other nurses started calling me. And once I began hearing their cases, there was no way that I could stop. And I'll share some of those with you. So the unprofessional conduct title, that this is just the Board of Nursing, but any boards, if you have any license in the state of Kansas, I'm telling you, these bureaucracies can take your license. But so they list a barrage of things under unprofessional conduct. So unprofessional conduct is the same title you would get if you sexually assaulted a patient or you physically beat a patient. They would give you unprofessional conduct. So they just group all these things together underneath it. So one nurse, Elaine Gebhardt, who reached out to me, she had put on a social media post or social media page that she opposed giving cross-sex hormones to children. I mean, she's seen the results of it as a nurse. The Board of Nursing came after her, wanted to label her with unprofessional conduct for debasing a healthcare practice. So this is just how broad that term is, and it can have career devastating impacts. I received a call from a nurse yesterday, just yesterday. So he's an LPN, and he'd been working out of Manhattan, Kansas. Well, and he'd been in the long-term care side for a long time in assisted living. He received a job offer in Florida to be the health and wellness director and move into an executive director position. Now, you don't need a nursing license to do that in Florida. So he moves to Florida. He's making $100,000 a year doing this. And he doesn't renew his nursing license in Kansas because he doesn't need to be a nurse in order to do this job. It's not required in Florida. So then he ends up with cancer, and he has to go through radiation. So his employer terminates him before he files for FMLA. He fills out, the wrongful terminations, going through that. But meanwhile, he has to support his family. So he tries to renew his nursing license so he can get back to working as a nurse. And Kansas says, oh no, you didn't renew your license on time, so you get the label of unprofessional conduct. And just sign this consent, which is like a guilty plea. Just sign this guilty plea, and we'll get your license reinstated in Kansas. He doesn't understand when you sign that guilty plea, you end up on 3 databases. They don't tell him this. Listed as unprofessional and in their newsletter, and then they shared it with the Board of Nursing in Florida. And they said, Kansas has labeled him as unprofessional. So now he can't get hired as a nurse in Florida. You guess where he's working? 7-Eleven. This is what happens all the time. Another nurse reached out to me, and she was renewing her license on her phone. She put in her credit card information. She accidentally put in the wrong number, the wrong credit card number. The Board of Nursing does not notify her that she put in the wrong number. No. They wait until she renews later on, and they said, oh, you've got unprofessional conduct because your credit card didn't go through. She's like, why didn't you notify me? Well, because we don't do that. But the truth is, for some people, they treat nurses differently. So one nurse can make a clerical error and there's no discipline. The next nurse does, and your career is over. And once you are labeled as unprofessional, your malpractice insurance will drop you or probably quadruple your rate. And I can't be a nurse practitioner in Kansas without malpractice insurance. And your insurance companies won't contract with you because now you've been labeled as unprofessional, and it's very hard to get a job. Who wants to hire somebody? The legal risk if the state of Kansas has labeled you as unprofessional. And I will tell you, I even said to the Board of Nursing, I said, I see now that my opportunities in nursing are going to be extremely limited. My professional career, if you're bent on doing this, is probably about over. Before we go to court, I just have to ask you, if I would just relinquish my license, would you back off? At least I could try to do something else, run for office or something. And they said, oh no, if you do that, we'll bring further action against you. Like, further action, what else can you do? So I wondered, what else can they do? So I told you go on the 3 databases, but if they revoke your license, that's the next step. They turn you over to the Office of Inspector General. And when you get put on the Office of Inspector General report, you can't be licensed to do anything else in the state. So let's say if they revoke my license, I wouldn't be able to be a hairdresser in the state of Kansas or sell real estate. And I will be flagged on all background checks. So I probably wouldn't be able to volunteer in a church nursery anymore. So when they say, their attorney told me, you have no idea how bad we can make this for you. They are not joking. They are not joking. But once again, does God ask us to do things that are logical? Does God ask us to stand for truth? Even when it's going to cost us, it's time to stand. We have to stand. And so I went to court. And going to court is not an easy decision, but my husband once again said, God doesn't ask us to do things that make sense. Because when you go to court, it's just an administrative law court. And all this administrative law court does, they don't look at the Constitution or anything else. They're just determining whether or not the Board of Nursing followed the rules and regs that they wrote. They write their own rules and regs. They're just looking to see, did they follow their own rules and regs? They're not considering the fact that they discipline some and don't discipline others, just whether or not they followed them. And if the judge rules against you, the Board of Nursing is going to send you the bill for all of the legal fees that it costs to take you to court. This is at a time when you can't get a job. So I'm unemployable right now. If you win, if the judge rules for you, then the Board of Nursing will have a meeting and they can still say, we disregard what the judge says. We're going to bring action against the license anyway. I mean, what's the point of court? It doesn't make any sense. And they also have the option of delaying. They can say, okay, we're going to drop this case until the public pressure dies down, and they could resurrect it again in 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, whenever they want, without any new additional evidence or anything. They can re-resurrect any case. So, and I know nurses who the investigation looked at them and they decided to drop the case. And then several years later, they said, lawyer up, we're coming after you again. So it's never over. It's never over, but that's the way the rules and regs have been written. There are just so many cases, so many cases. But this is the battlefront God has me on now. The emotional cost, the public nature of discipline is very demoralizing. It's the public shaming process. It's the #1 reasons for nurses committing suicide is board discipline. It's not unique to Kansas, but Kansas is one of the worst states. I speak at national conferences all the time, and nurses in other states tell me they do not do telehealth in Kansas because of our board. The cumulative effects of multiple board agency discipline also takes a toll, and then, of course, the collateral damage. A lot of you probably know the story of APRNs, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, who, when she renewed her license, they will ask you, do you want to renew your RN or your APRN license? Well, we have to renew both, but they don't let us do both at the same time. So she clicks on the RN box. It takes you to another page. You answer questions. It takes you to another page, and then you pay a fee. Come back to the home page, click on the APRN, and do the same thing with those next 2 pages. So she is busy seeing her patients. She accidentally clicks the RN link twice. They don't tell her. They don't tell her this. 2 months later, she's contacted by a pharmacist who says, you can't prescribe medicine anymore because you didn't renew your nurse practitioner license. She calls the Board of Nursing. She goes, what? I renewed it. Here's my payment. I paid twice. And they said, oh, no, you paid twice for an RN. She's like, who would want to renew an RN license twice? This doesn't make any sense. And they said, yep, well, that's what happened. So you can't see patients until we get this resolved. And so stop seeing patients you can't prescribe. She says, I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. There is such a shortage of psych care. What do you want me to do with my patients? And they said, send them to the ER. And she said, people have talked to me about the rapes that they've gone through and these horrible tragedies, and you want me to send them to the emergency room? It is dangerous for them to go off their medicines cold turkey. You can't do this to people. But they didn't care. So then they come back to her 2 months later. She signs the consent agreement because she doesn't understand the risk. They don't tell you about the databases. And so then her malpractice drops her. She renegotiates with another company and gets it at 4 times the rate. Then her Blue Cross and Blue Shield drops her because now she's listed as unprofessional. They crushed her, and all those patients lost access to her care. This is what's happening. This is the battlefront. But John 16:33 says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. It's not you might, you will. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So praise the Lord. We do have opportunities. So I spoke in the Senate on House HCR 5008, which is a constitutional amendment which we will vote on in the next primary, which would give our elected official oversight over these bureaucracies, their rules and regs. We need that to happen. And then with the help of Speaker Dan Hawkins, I met with him, Representative Christy Williams, and with Representative Sandy Pickert and others. We got together and we talked about it, and we brought the Board of Nursing before the House Oversight Committee, and they grilled them. They were incensed. We brought all these nurses in to tell their stories. Now, keep in mind, for every one nurse I found that would come forward, there are a dozen more that are too afraid. But I'm telling, justice is coming. Justice is coming. So these are just highlights from articles. Voicing outrage. Kansas lawmakers outline potential changes for the State Board of Nursing. And Representative Pickert, I'm so thankful for her. She's really been a fighter for us. So I'll just kind of close with standing firm. We've got to put on the full armor of God so that you'll be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. Therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, keep standing. We do not own the outcome. We don't own the outcome. We do own our role in seeking justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly with our God. I don't know what the future holds. I just know who holds the future. This is the battlefront the Lord has called me to. But the question you have to ask yourself is, what battlefront has He called you to? Make a dent where you're sent. We are all called to do that. So I want to encourage you just to stand firm. It's going to cost us, but together we can make a difference. Thank you.
We have a limited amount of time to ask questions, so we're just going to get to a few of them. We'll start here and we'll get back to you. Okay. Just a quick one. Is the Board of Nursing appointed or elected? And who appoints them?
The Board of Nursing is all appointed by the governor. They are a very left-leaning organization, and the executive director is appointed by the governor.
All right, it's unfortunate the draconian punishments looked at. I had the good fortune prior to my current job, being a district court judge, I was appointed by Governor Brownback to serve on the Kansas Board of Appeals Office. And I'm telling you, I was one of the public members. I know less about medicine than anybody in here, but I always thought we were the conscience of the board. And we didn't ever discipline anybody like that. In fact, our first idea was, how can we save this doctor's job or profession? That's how we looked at it. However, keep in mind, as you just indicated, all the members are appointed by the governor. And I had to leave that office to take the current office. And now I looked at your Board of Nursing, all appointed by the current Democratic governor. So this is another example of when you get the wrong governor in office, what power they have. Because I don't know about how long it's been like that, but it was a far different even Board of Appeals Arts now than when I was on.
Right, and I think COVID changed a lot of that too. And so one of the legislators' initiatives, they're going to be trying to pass a bill in order to have the appointments come from the legislative as well as the governor, and mix that up a little bit so you don't have a board that's leaning one way or the other. And my course, I'm appealing to the next district level, so I hope you're my judge. Okay.
Is this comparable to the same battle we fought before, where the Kansas legislature tried to take control over, I don't know what board it was, but the public turned it down, probably out of ignorance.
Yes.
So how are you going to make them smart?
Right. So when Value Them Both went through, there was a very similar constitutional amendment at the same time, and people didn't understand it. I think my the case that the nurses are going through is the ones I've talked to Americans for Prosperity. We're going to be pushing the nursing case as an example to show this is what happens when unelected, we don't have any oversight. If you filed a complaint, if I filed a complaint against the Board of Nursing right now, guess who would oversee that? The Board of Nursing. You have the fox guarding the hen house. Without our elected officials getting oversight over these rules and regs, they can write whatever they want.
Okay, question here?
I work at the VA hospital, but I work for Veterans Court. That 2020, I was fired because I said, we're not taking the COVID shot. VFW said, we'll follow the VA rules. I said, no, and give you encouragement. The guy who fired me got fired. Senator Moran came to my rescue, told me that national, that he wanted me hired back. So I want to tell you, stand firm. My question is, tort claims. Any idea if we have grounds for tort claims for COVID residuals?
I'm not sure about that. I will tell you something that is encouraging, what the legislators did talking about claims. At the end of that second hearing, they said, we want you, the nurses who've been impacted by this draconian board, to make claims against the state. The Board of Nursing has an extra $4 million in their coffers from all the fines and fees that they've extracted from nurses, and we want to give that back to you. So make claims against the state, nurses, and we're going to give you the board's money.
One more question. Can we get back to him? Last question.
I'm a respiratory therapist. I began my career in Kansas, and when COVID started, I sacrificially decided to go to the bad places. I didn't die, right? But I did let my Kansas license drop while I was in Florida. I was in Florida for almost 2 years, working there as a respiratory therapist. Now, I'm stuck back in Kansas, and I haven't tried yet, because people have told me it's difficult to renew your license as a respiratory therapist in Kansas, because I let it drop while I was in Florida. Is it even possible? Should I even try?
So I don't know very much. And are you under the Board of Healing? Are respiratory therapists under the Board of Healing Arts? Okay, they're not. If it was under the Board of Nursing, I would caution you. But under the Board of Healing Arts, they've got a diversionary process. If you weren't practicing there is no crime in not renewing your license. The only crime, they would say, is if you're practicing when your license is not current. If you were not in practice, then there's no issue. You can renew whenever you want. If you were practicing, then the Board of Healing Arts has a diversion process. So they wouldn't do the whole public shaming and discipline that the Board of Nursing does. Okay, well, if you were licensed in other states, you'd be fine. As long as you were licensed wherever you were practiced. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you.